My name is Josh. I'm the Chief Development Officer for ACE Consulting. Our topic today is solicitation reviews made simple. So what we're looking to have everybody learn today from this is how to navigate and understand the key sections of a solicitation. Now that's loaded right there, just that very first point. So Kyle's going to go through that. Also, evaluate the criteria and what criteria matters most, how to prepare a technical, management, past performance, and pricing deliverables, common compliance mistakes, and how a strong review process leads directly to contract success. So our speaker today is none other than the great Kyle Thacker. He is the Director of Government Procurement for ACE. Kyle is involved with this every single day. So he leads the management of federal and state contracts, proposal, strategy, and project transition from sales to operations. So Kyle is the guy in regards to proposal writing and would be able to lay all this stuff out for you.
When we talk about solicitations, this is often a part of contracting, either federal or just within the commercial industry, where things can kind of get a little confusing. Hopefully, as Josh was saying there earlier, we really want to try and make this as simple as possible. Hopefully, out of today's lesson, we'll be able to get together a couple things for you guys just learning. Maybe you're new to solicitations, maybe you've done them for a while, maybe you're trying to onboard some new team members, basically trying to get through this solicitation process and figure out sort of the parts and pieces that might help make your team more efficient, better able to respond and sort of show the best of your company and your team's skill sets. That's what we're going to talk about. Basically, in order to do that, we're going to run through three different things today. We're going to understand solicitation structure. We're going to identify your must-have items or any kind of risks to avoid, things like that. And lastly, we're going to learn how to organize a compliant winning review whenever you're working with within these parameters, basically. So, question for today: what part of a solicitation do you usually find the most confusing? I've got a couple examples here. Is it section L, section M, which is evaluation factors, or maybe it's something else? Maybe it's just the reps and certs or something like that. If you've got a chance, maybe drop a comment in the chat and just kind of give us an idea of what you all typically struggle with or find the most confusing about all this. Well, this is again, probably why everybody's here. Why are they critical? Why are solicitation reviews critical? Well, many firms, there's a whole reason for why you might lose a bid or something like that. But from a foundational perspective, a solicitation, government solicitation, municipality solicitation, what have you, it's an interaction that you're having with the buyer, with the purchaser, with the contract officer, whoever. They're trying to solicit a service from you. In our case, this is, construction management, or it is specific to, maybe it's just construction or facilities maintenance management, things like that. People think maybe it should be the same as like a regular type of bid. Well, obviously we know that that's not the case, right? And there's nothing worse than you putting in all this time, effort, energy into a proposal for a solicitation only to find out that you've lost it, right? And most of the time when a company loses an opportunity, it's due to either they missed a requirement, they might have misinterpreted some of the evaluation criteria, they might have not necessarily understood what the agency is asking for, right there, misaligned deliverables. There could be a whole host of reasons as to why, you might not always find the success that you feel like you should. And, I guess for our purposes here today, we're going to work off this framework, which is a good solicitation review is going to equate to fewer reworks with your team. It's going to result in higher compliance and result in higher win rates. So, the biggest thing we tell clients all the time is this solicitation has to be your roadmap. It has to be your step-by-step process towards answering that question that the buyer has. How do you represent the best value? How do you plan to approach the specific concerns of my project, of my fill in the blank, right? This is really for you to set yourself apart from those other companies. And in order to do that, we're going to use this solicitation as our roadmap. So when we're talking about a solicitation, You'll see these. I'm sure if you're familiar with working in the federal space, or again just in the commercial space, you'll see the acronyms RFP, RFQ, FB, ITB, whatever. They're all kind of saying, hey, we have some money that we want to give to someone. Here are the parameters for it. Well, just wanted to call out that there is a distinction between these letters. Oftentimes people use them interchangeably, but you really need to guard against that. An RFP is a request for proposal. Anytime you see RFP, that should signify on your end as the reviewer, that should signify right off the go, I have a technical component and a price evaluation. So it's a two-part request. An RFQ, a request for quotation, is really that. It's a price-driven request for a quote. So again, that might be a subtle difference. It might not make a lot of sense if you're not familiar with seeing what the terms mean, but you should know that that has weight, right? If it's a simplified acquisition, if all they're asking for is for you to fill out a price schedule, X amount of hours in a given year for a given scope of work, then you don't have to necessarily jump through as many hoops as you would on, say, a technical proposal that encompasses, a proposed schedule, a proposed management team structure, those type things. And then an IFB is going to be, what probably most people see too is it's just simple invitation to bid, right? You see it a lot in construction. It's usually lowest price wins. It's not necessarily a lowest price technically acceptable. That would probably be more in line with an RFP. So, just the very first thing to keep in mind here is that those three things, whenever you're reviewing a solicitation and trying to use this roadmap effectively, those are three, it's not an exhaustive list, but those are three big distinctions between, what, or I guess three key factors that buyer is looking for. They're looking for something in a different way. So you need to pay attention to that. The next part of just the overall anatomy of a solicitation is going to break it down into certain sections. These that I've called out here, section C, L, I, and K, these are probably the most important sections especially for government bids, government solicitations. And I use that term interchangeably, bid and solicitation. But see, there you go again. What you want to be looking for is anytime you're trying to use this as a roadmap, you want to understand what the scope of work is. Sometimes it's called a performance of work statement. We'll talk about these, and you'll probably hear me talk more about these as we go on. But, in order for you to provide a compliant, responsive proposal, you first have to understand the scope of work. And in order to respond to that next part there, section L, that's going to be our instructions. That's going to be our, do you submit it on a website? Do you submit it via hard copy? What's your font size? What is your file naming structure? All of those details, if they're required and if they're present in the solicitation, those are going to be found under, typically a section L. Section E, we're going to talk about section M as we get into some of our compliance matrices and things like that as we get later on. But, understanding how your bid and your company are going to be evaluated against the requested criteria and evaluated against your competition is going to be hugely important for you to communicate to your team as they're going through and building out, again, your company's best foot forward. And lastly here, I've got, just the clauses and certifications. Any time that you're dealing with a newer entity, maybe it's a market that you're not as familiar with, a buyer that you're not as familiar with, you really, really, really want to pay attention to these clauses because, as we've all seen, government contract will be filled with incorporation by reference of certain contract clauses and FAR regulations, DFARS regulations, all those type things. If it's referenced in one of these sections, again, I'm using section I, section K, if it's referenced in there, you're being held to that standard. And so that might be a simple go, no-go decision for you. And again, we're going to kind of talk about some of these things as we progress. So as we talk about, what's required in a performance of work statement, that's what it's really telling you is going to be asked of you, right? So, for example, we work a lot with the National Park Service. They provide you with the scope of work, with a performance of work statement, and basically say, hey, here's our deliverables that we're going to ask you to provide. We need you to take meeting minutes. We need you to, approve certified payroll or review certified payroll, evaluate schedules, things like that. Those are super critical to people like myself who work in this space all the time. We're trying to identify risks for our operations team. We're trying to poke through those as early as possible so that we can, again, think through an effective solution in order to better respond. We talked about it just a second ago, but if we don't actually go through and verify that our formatting is correct or checked all the boxes for, so you need volume 1, volume 2, factor 1A, all those things. If you don't do that, then all your bid's going to get thrown out, right? Your proposal is going to get basically passed over. And again, ultimately, all of this is just about making you we want you to be on top of your bids. We want you to be on top of responding and really articulating why your company presents that best path for somebody to pick you. We want you all to be able to really develop a strong proposal overall. So this starts this entire cascading process within each of your companies. You're going to have to figure out a system that works for you, for your team, and for how your team operates. At this stage in the game, what I'm looking for, just in a quick review, I'm looking for scope alignment with our capabilities. So when I'm just looking at it from ACE's point of view, I'm trying to, when I'm looking at one of these, make sure that we actually deliver on what the government's asking for. If it's an evaluation factor, are we actually poised to get all of that information compiled before the deadline? And then, that goes into that next point too, of just overall due date. Is this something that I can actually manage? Can I build out a schedule in order to get a good package put together? Next thing is going to be our overall, I'm looking for red flags. I'm looking for strange contract clauses, maybe some signs that there is an incumbent who already is working in the space and it's going to be kind of hard to lodge out of that contract arrangement. Just anything that may or may not make this worth our time as a company to pursue. And after I've kind of looked at that, part of what it is that you should be doing with your team is this a strategic fit? Do we have the capability to do this? Who's our competition? And ultimately, what's our profitability and what's our risk look like? Is this a worthwhile use of our time? And so part of what we see all the time with contractors in the federal space, what we see with just our clients in general, they tend to oversimplify the individual requirements within a solicitation. And it's easy to do. And I'm not pointing fingers, because I know at one time I was the same way. And that's just one of these things that you kind of get better with time. But when we're trying to think about these deliverables, your technical proposal, your management plan, that's going to be your how. That's the how is my company best suited. But your past performance references, obviously that's the proof. These are the receipts, right? We want to make sure that those really articulate the best position that we can. And then obviously our cost proposal, we want to be providing value, right? We want to make sure that the taxpayer money is being used efficiently, used effectively, and that they see the value that you provide. And then the last two things here, a compliance matrix. This is not necessarily a deliverable that the government or anyone will ever see. Sometimes you're provided with a compliance matrix in some circumstances. Be sure and compliment that contract officer or contracting office if they do provide you with a compliance matrix. But in my experience, most of the time, you're going to have to be the one to actually create that on your own. But that compliance matrix, in whatever modified version you choose to create, is going to be your tracking tool. And then again, we're going to talk about some of these workflows. How are we as a team, how are we going to manage between our management structure, our management team, our operations team? How are those two going to work together in order to get me the information that I need prior to our bid submission deadline? So again, these are just all things that, as we're looking at and we're reviewing these solicitations, these are all things that you as the reviewer should be sort of thinking through, so that you can, again, be successful. So one of the most important things that we utilize and that we tell our clients here is just the overall importance of a compliance matrix. So what is a compliance matrix? Well, easily put, links each solicitation requirement to the proposal section. It prevents, omissions and noncompliance. It creates, an overall framework for you to follow as early as possible. And it's a living, breathing document. Those are kind of the four big criteria, or, the four big takeaways there for what is a compliance matrix. Again, these are going to look different if it's not already provided for you in that solicitation package. You're going to have to develop one of these, and we're going to get into that. So I have here a sample compliance matrix. Pretty straightforward. This is, one that I just sort of adopted over time. And you look at this and you say, okay, well, this isn't very helpful. Well, the intent is to give yourself and give your team a framework. And so I would always encourage my clients to basically use this top section. So right at the top, you see what the evaluation factor is. You see what they're asking for. So in this example, they're looking for 5 years of previous experience. The next column over, we see our company qualifications. So what is, I've got ACE's response. What's your response? How does your company actually compare against that evaluation criteria? Do we have 5 years experience? Do we have 3? Do we have 50 years experience? I don't know. And then also is the next column over, do we actually meet that requirement? Again, if they want 5, let's just say warehouse facilities, 1 million square feet built within the last 5 years, you may or may not have enough past performance to actually meet that requirement. And it's a yes or no answer, right? This is what the compliance matrix is. It's a tool for you to use as you develop the proposal. And then, so again, as what we tell clients, use something simple like this. It could be anything. It could be a Word document. It could be an Excel sheet. Just make it work for you. Make it work for your team. But use this as a way to identify each and every evaluation factor, right? So I've got down here underneath recommendations to incorporate. Give yourself a space to talk with your team, right? I don't know how large your proposal team is. You might have proposal writers, you might have graphic specialists, designers, you might have just overall, you might have a compliance team. There could be any number of things, or it could just be you working by yourself on this. Give yourself some space to treat this as to treat this as just a page, a piece of paper. Keep your thoughts consistent, keep them concise. And then I've got down underneath this, insert number as like a TBD sector on this form. Make something that's easily, you can copy and paste it, just because one solicitation might have 3 evaluation factors. One solicitation might have 15 evaluation factors. Again, you want something that's scalable and repeatable that becomes this living, breathing document, right? And it provides you a check as you go through. And you say, okay, we'll go through what? If you haven't heard of them before, what we rely on here at ACE is called the color team review process. And it's we're going to go through a little bit of it here. This is a way for you to talk and to work through each solicitation in different phases. So what is it? The color team process was really born out of the Defense Department, right? Some of the early 70s and 80s projects. What was going on there? Well, you had a lot of, take your pick, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, whatever the company was. They were looking on very complex projects, right? Very complex projects. And they started to sort of incorporate these different colors into the review process, and each color meant a separate thing. Well, 1990s roll around, and I would encourage you all to go look at this. Shipley Associates put together, what is probably the more generally accepted color teams, as part of their best practices. So, that's probably a conversation for another time, but look up Shipley Associates, their color team map, and their overall proposal schedule. And just know that what they did in the 90s basically set the tone for what we see in the 2000s up until today, which is, again, APMP. If you were on our last webinar, I'm pretty sure we talked about APMP on that some, but APMP is the Association of Proposal Management Professionals. They basically are, what is considered one of the industry standards for how you respond to these technical proposals, and they utilize this color team review process as well. It's used by government firms, or excuse me, government contractors, commercial firms. It's used all over, and you don't have to have, you don't have to follow it to the T, but again, it's designed in such a way that each color represents a different phase in the overall bid process. So, I've got three here that we want to that are common. We use these. Green team is most likely going to be a price review, right? All money's green. Maybe that was an easy color to pick for that one. At the green team review, this is going to confirm our costs. Is our cost, is it realistic? Are we charging $400 an hour, or are we charging $200 an hour? Well, I think my client might only pay, $150 an hour. If at the green team meeting we find out we're at $400 an hour, we're going to overbid this. They're going to not approve us. Hey, we need to know that. That's the type of thing that's addressed in a green team meeting. Same thing with the pink team, and I'm kind of bouncing around out of sequence here, but having a meeting specific for the early draft review to ensure that the tone's right, our story, sort of who we are, how we're going to present ourselves, make sure that that's in alignment, and then having a final review before everything goes out the door. This is your gold team. This is your executive review. Verify the readiness for submission. Make sure that there's no outstanding formatting issues or compliance issues, things like that. Hopefully this kind of gives you an idea that from start to finish, your team and your proposal is going to go through a whole lot of different review phases. And it's important to be able to structure those teams based on the outcomes that you want to achieve. So again, this is something that we highly recommend you look into, and obviously we can answer more questions about this, but I would say the biggest thing is there's probably a different color to represent a whole host of meetings. Don't get too tied up in that. What you need to focus on is, how do I modify this approach in order to make it scalable and repeatable for my team? So again, how do I modify this to my team structure, to how we operate? Again, as you're going through solicitations, as you are building out those solicitations, as you are starting to develop your company's response with your team, again, you want to build that standardized checklist. So we talked about the color teams, we talked about the compliance matrix. Those are two really strong checklists for you to have. And also to use collaboration tools for version control. We could do a whole presentation just on something like a Microsoft Word, or some kind of a word processing software, in order to make sure version 1 is not what gets sent out. You want to get sent out version 3, with your bid. Version 1 had all these typos and all these corrections. Nothing was fixed. That controls how you basically your quality control process. That's super important there. You want to hold these kickoff meetings with clear assignments with your team. This again probably relates more with the color team meetings. Everyone in your team should know what a gold team is. Everyone in your company should know what a pink team is, what a red team is, blue team, whatever. Everyone should know that overall process, because again, it starts to become synonymous. It starts to gain traction within your company of, I know that in a gold team review, this solicitation is getting ready to go out the door, right? I can put my editor hat on and really feel good about what's getting ready to be submitted. So, hold those kickoff meetings with those different phases of the bid. And then lastly, just for best practices, you just want to make sure that everything that you're doing conforms to what they're asking for. And a lot of that falls down to your reps and certs in federal contracting. A lot of that's going to be how your company is positioned on sam.gov, but you have to do your due diligence and make sure that there's no surprises, sort of at the end. Pitfalls to avoid. We want to make sure that we're digging into these sort of minor formatting rules. We want to make sure that we are not missing attachments, forms. We don't want to make sure that we're not being inconsistent in sort of our technical narratives, or we're using what I'll call boilerplate language or anything like that. And also too, we want to pay special attention to make sure we're not failing to confirm submission instructions. Just a simple notification to that contract officer or that POC that you've got, making sure that they actually did get what you need or what they needed from you. It's just oftentimes people don't take the time to just go that extra mile, and that's kind of what we're trying to address here. So, and then I know I'm kind of bouncing around. There's a ton of information here, but oftentimes we get asked, how do you partner, right? How do you link up with an adjacent company in order to best respond to a solicitation? A lot of times that company, you'll have to there's requirements, you might have to already have a teaming agreement in place. You might have to have whatever. These are just some bullet points for you to kind of keep in mind. And I would just strongly encourage you that if you are reviewing solicitations and trying to bid on things as a team, just know that that is going to build in a lot more upfront review time on your end to make sure that you actually, you number one, you address the gaps in capability between the two companies, and two, just to make sure that you actually appear and be proven as a viable partnership entity, a viable teaming arrangement, whatever. There's a lot more that goes into it, and so don't start the solicitation review process thinking that, oh, I'm going to bid with company X. Don't fall prey to that. There's going to be a lot of communication that goes back and forth just to set up the proper paperwork, to set up the proper pricing structure, to set up all these type of things. And you really need to be documenting and being as open and responsive as you can with all of your partners on that teaming agreement, as well as the end user, to make sure that as you prepare your solicitation that you meet what they're asking for. So just wrapping up here, a lot of times when you're reviewing these, treat each solicitation as the basic roadmap. It gets you from point A to point B. It tells you the evaluation criteria. It tells you how you're going to, submit your bid, what you can and can't do, what they're going to be looking for. Focus on the evaluation of your company and focus on compliance, right? I can't say that enough. That's really where that compliance matrix comes in. You want to be utilizing your compliance matrix. You want to be utilizing any sort of checklists that you have for your company to make sure that nothing gets missed. There's no worse feeling than spending 2 weeks on a proposal only to find out that you didn't sign page 34. There's no worse thing than that. So build out your framework and make sure you avoid that. Also, just engage early with your teaming partners. Engage early with your buyers, with your agency buyers. Make sure that you're doing everything that you can to get out in front of that. And ultimately, just want you all to position your bids or solicitation responses. We want you to position them to comply with what's needed, and we just ultimately want you all to win. So this has been, giving you some things to think about. And I would just further say that, as you go through this, obviously, just know that as you go through this solicitation review process, is what I'm trying to say. Know that you're always going to find and learn new things, both about how you operate as a company, how you respond, and do those types of things. Know that each and every one of your interactions that you have with that end user or your team or whatever, those are each opportunity as a learning opportunity. You really have to do that, because I can't tell you, when we first started, sort of helping clients, people always want the fastest way to get to the top. And while I can completely appreciate that mindset, is oftentimes solicitations are slow paced. This is really something that's going to take time for you to build up and develop. Just, I guess what I'm saying is be realistic and give yourself a little bit of grace whenever you're coming up with some of these things, because there is really, it's really a lot of information there. So
We appreciate that, Kyle. I have one question for Kyle. You can throw a question in there if you want to. Otherwise, if you have a question after the fact, please feel free to reach out to us. We love helping. Kyle's always available. We can get him connected to you. to try to help in any way possible. My only question really, Kyle, was in regards to starting kind of the way we started with starting a solicitation department, so to speak, because we were always a negotiated proposal company, B2B negotiated proposal company. And then when we started responding to RFPs and solicitations, that was an entire process on how we built out the structure that you just went over. In addition to obviously the different color teams, which we got from the class that you went to. But other than that, there's a lot of stuff that has just been built over time that we've learned. So if somebody was, for instance, just getting their GSA schedule like we did, or they just got on a contract to bid colleges or something like that, what would you recommend a good starting point to them be for really getting those building blocks taken care of on the solicitation side?
What would be the most important thing? Like, sort of, how would you go about that? I would say it's two parts, really. The first part would be making sure that you are documenting everything that you have. For the longest time, when we were really going through that transition period, as you outlined, one of the things that we really understood early on was our past performance was crucial, right? And that's why when we get into those compliance matrices and things like that, we were trying to spell out exactly how our experience and the things that we did as a company related to maybe a newer service or something that was a little bit outside of our typical day-to-day business. To your point, we kind of shifted our model a little bit right there. I would just say the immediate thing to do is make sure that your current projects, anything that you're doing currently, and I don't care if that's pouring concrete sidewalks, hanging windows, setting bar joists, whatever it is, if you are in our seat, and you're trying to put forth this best vision for your company, be very, very diligent in recording contract numbers, point of contact information, scopes of work, how many square feet was this, when did we do it, what challenges did we have to overcome in order to best provide the service. A lot of times I feel like companies don't have a mechanism to capture that data, especially a small business, because in a small business, it's all hands on deck all the time, right? Those lines get kind of blurry and, whatever happens. But I would say make sure that someone in your company is recording that information, storing that information for later use, because you could set and write the best, technical response that you wanted, but if it doesn't include the things that they're asking for, and I say there in terms of, that point of contact, if it doesn't have that, then it's not gonna carry as much weight in the evaluation factor. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that I would say is, if you're kind of starting from scratch in terms of having those boilerplate style blocks, you'll come to find out that it's a lot of the same information is typically what's asked. What's your management structure? What's your approach to safety? What's your approach to schedule? What's your approach to this, that, and the other? I would say take a little bit of time before you actually start your next bid and just maybe write 1 to 2 paragraphs. And it doesn't have to be an all-inclusive, all-encompassing solution, but that will at least kind of start this snowball process of just, again, putting pen to paper, getting your approach somewhat ironed out. So maybe the takeaway from this call is, between now and the end of this week, I'm going to come up with 1 paragraph for our company's management structure, our approach to cost and schedule, and our approach to safety. Those 3 things. And in some way, you'll be able to take that little paragraph and build it based on what those evaluation factors are. So hopefully I think that answers your question. Those would be my 2.
Yeah, that absolutely answered it. That's kind of what I was hoping you were going to go into, and you did just that. So once again, Kyle, thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, give us a call. We would love to assist you guys in any way possible that we can. Thank you guys again. Appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day.